Hi everyone. I want to talk to you a little bit, and this is going to be, I hope, a very short video on my expectations for your first speech, which is your informative speech. I know that I put guidelines up on Blackboard, but I want to just kind of reinforce some items that I think are important. And if you have questions, please email me, and so we can talk about them. Again, I'm more than happy to look at any kind of outlines or kind of help you break down kinds of subjects. But you have to give me a little bit of time in order to do so. Please don't email me the night before you're going to give your speech, because that isn't enough time. You got to give me probably at least a few days so we can work this out together. So again, let's talk a little bit about that. So again, the guidelines are up on Blackboard. They're not going to change from what I'm going to say here, but again, I just want to reinforce some things. One, all of your informative speeches must be 4 to 6 minutes long. If they're under or over time, there are penalties for that. That's why you need to practice ahead of time. And so, of course, and what I mean by that is when I'm talking about the speech itself. So when you're introducing yourself at the very beginning and you're panning to the audience and you go back to the audience, that is not included in the 6-minute time limit. It's the actual speaking time that you put together. So if you have if the ultimate recording time is like 7 minutes because you spend 20 seconds introducing different people and you pan to your audience, don't worry about that. That's not a big deal at all. You must cite the sources within your speech, okay? So what you need to do is when you give your speech, obviously, is you're going to upload a formal outline of your speech, and of course the video of your speech itself, but you must orally cite the 4 sources, minimum of 4. You can have more than that, but you must orally cite those sources within the speech itself. If you don't, technically it's plagiarism. Okay, so make sure that you have that stuff written down on your notes or in your manuscript so that you can make sure that you orally cite that. When you are orally citing sources, it's important that you only have to cite the specific source and date. For example, if you wanted to cite a newspaper, it would be according to the New York Times of September 2nd, 2016, or whatever it might be. Or if you're citing a website, you're going to cite the home page and the date that you accessed it. I don't need the entire page itself. When you're putting that in your works cited page, which you need to include with your outline, then you would actually put the full URL for where you got that information from. But when it comes to actually the speech itself, it doesn't make sense to cite the entire URL because that would actually be a nightmare and be really, really long. It would be very, very difficult for you to memorize. You don't have to use visual aids. I encourage you to do so. We already talked about visual aids when it came to that visual aids lecture. Kind of showed you a really, really good example of someone, because most people use PowerPoint of some kind if you're going to show different kinds of pictures or whatever it might be. If you're going to use video clips or props, make sure that they're appropriate and make sure that you speak for the visual aid. You just don't show us a visual aid and you don't actually talk about that. Again, we'll be taking a look at a variety of speeches that both use visual aids and don't use visual aids and so forth, and both good and bad. Okay, and of course turning in an outline and so forth. You can look at the different kinds of procedures. You should use only note cards. I do say no full manuscripts and so forth. So if you want to put your manuscript on the note cards themselves, that would be an appropriate thing to do. But it's important that you probably just use a few note cards and so forth. Again, extemporaneous speaking is the best style of delivery. If you're just looking at your note cards the entire time, that could be really, really dangerous. And then you have a stack of note cards that you're trying to read from. So when we go down and we take a look at just some of the rest of this is the procedures for videotaping yourself. You can talk about that. Just a couple of things, I said practice ahead of time. Remember, I like things that are explicit, okay? Especially for your first speech. It's important that we get those basics down first. I want a clear introduction. I want a clear attention getter. Now, you don't have to say, well, this is my attention getter or this is my thesis statement. We will be able to tell based upon your manuscript if you do it right. But for example, I want you to have a clear preview. First, I'm going to talk about X. Then I'm going to talk about X, and finally I'm going to talk about, or first, second, third, or then, or whatever it might be. But be explicit, okay? With your thesis statement, be explicit. Today I'm going to talk to you about lime jello. and why lime jello is the most important jello there is, or whatever it might be, okay? Be explicit. It's a simple, one-sentence, declarative sentence about what your topic is going to be. As you're kind of going through your speech itself, try to use internal summaries, internal transitions as you move from point to point. So an internal summary is something like, well, now that we've talked about what lime jello is, let's talk about its different applications and how it can really be noted as the most important flavor of jello out there. So I summarized what I did and I transitioned as we kind of move forward. At the very minimum, try to say second or next or then or whatever it is to make sure that your audience knows where it is. Because if your audience that you're speaking to doesn't know where you're going, I'm sure that when I'm watching your speeches, I don't know where you're going as well. Okay? Remember, this is an informative speech. It's not persuasion. Don't try to persuade us that you're about the latest product. Try to be even-handed. So if you're going to talk about a controversial topic like stem cell research or something of that nature, you're more than welcome to do so. But there are drawbacks that come with certain things. We want to advocate. So I've had students who've done, they've done speeches on how the New England Patriots are the greatest football team ever. And in many respects, I wouldn't necessarily argue with that. But it's important that if you're going to do that, I wouldn't characterize your speech as that. I would say, I'm going to talk about, the New England Patriots, eras or something of that nature. That would be a much more even-handed speech. You want to avoid, persuasion because, again, that's going to come in later speeches, and you want to have some kind of balance as you're going through. So if you're going to talk about something controversial, maybe you talk about the disadvantages. So if you're going to talk about, how to tie a specific kind of tie, I mean, this isn't really very controversial, but you might talk about the disadvantages of that particular procedure. Or if you're going to talk about some kind of new medical topic or whatever, you might talk about there are some drawbacks, because there's always drawbacks with different kinds of technologies or different kinds of things that we're facing. Certainly if you talk with your hands, let them go. I've already kind of mentioned that. Remember, stand with your feet still, no swaying, no going like this, no putting your hands in your pockets. If you're going to, try to hold your note cards in one hand and flip them, as you're going. If you're just passing them back and forth, it's like you need a ball in your hand. That just demonstrates that you're fidgeting and you're nervous. And of course, finally, I do say try to have some fun with this. This is fun. It can be fun. I want you to have fun. I know a lot of you are like, what are you talking about? It's public speaking, I'm going to die. But really, if you talk about things that you think are important or that you're passionate about or whatever it might be, this can actually be entertaining. A final note about speech topics. Okay. Again, I encourage you to choose really any kind of informative topic you are, except for a couple of caveats. One, again, nothing illegal, nothing that's going to be dangerous, nothing that's going to get you in trouble. I don't want to know how you make a dirty bomb, or I don't want you to, demonstrate that you're smoking weed or whatever it is. That's not something that is appropriate for an informed speech or whatever it might be, especially when you're doing it in front of an audience, and especially when this is something that's going to be graded. I like unique kinds of topics, so if you can find out some kind of new interesting item. For example, I just posted on Facebook an interesting article about how they found these scrolls from that were actually buried under Mount Vesuvius, and actually they don't have, because they're charred, they don't have the ability to unroll them and see what's on there. Until actually just this last year, they've actually developed a new technology that actually can read what's on those scrolls because of the ink and so forth, and they're going to actually try to read them digitally. Now, they haven't perfected it yet, but to me that's really, really cool, especially for scholars who are interested in that kind of stuff. It might have, implications for other kinds of technologies, but the ability to read something that is burned or charred or something like that because of what the ink in this new technology would be really, really fascinating and interesting. Again, it doesn't have to be about that. It can be something as simple as the human back. You can talk about lights, light bulbs. I really don't care, as long as it's informative in nature and you're trying to inform us about, the history of makeup, basketball. Again, when you're talking about topics that are very, very large, like basketball or something of that nature, try to narrow it. If you're going to talk about maybe the history of the first basketball game, that would be a much more appropriate topic than just talking about basketball in general, or lacrosse, or other kinds of sports. Be a bit more specific with what you're going to get into. Okay? And again, feel free to run with this 4 to 6 minutes. This is informative, but try to be balanced. If you have any questions about these kinds of expectations, again, please contact me as soon as you can so that we can talk about this further. Thank you, and we'll see you later, guys.